And here to discuss that and more of the week's headlines is host of the WGN Political Report, Paul Lisnek.
Let's start with one.
Here's a fun group. Good to see you.
Yeah, how are you,
The three of
Paul?
us need to get together more.
Exactly.
Well, here's our opportunity, okay? Let's talk about the biggest story of, I don't know, the year so far, and that is a new Pope,
Yeah.
Pope Leo from Chicago. You hate to say that, religion has anything to do with politics, but you got to think in some way it shapes world politics, or does it have an impact at all?
Oh, it absolutely does.
Yeah.
But that being said, some of the kind of stuff that you see, and in social media and whatever, a little bit silly. Did they pick him because he's a response to our government and all that? No. These are cardinals from all over the world who have a pick, who are guided by the Holy Spirit. That is not what they're operating on. So there are all sorts of theories out there. There's people who are upset. Will he be woke? Will he be this? Here's, I think, the bottom line. I'm not a Pope expert, but for me, the bottom line is to say, I think when the weight of the papacy, which is already upon him, gets even more into his world, I think we're going to see him shift, as so many have. People are looking at what he said in the past. He's been critical of some of the administration's policies on immigration, that sort of thing.
And deportation.
Like that, yeah. Back in 2012, he made a negative comment about LGBTQ rights. So the question is, in 2025, is that where he stands, or does he, now that he has to reach out to all people of every, age, shape, and form, does some of that mellow a bit? There are many who believe he's going to put himself in the mold of a Pope Francis. We'll see if he does. And Pope Francis had some little changes and gains towards the end of his papacy, and we'll see if he does. But I think the bottom line is, look, for now, Chicagoans can rejoice in the fact that we have somebody that we thought was a Cubs fan. Turns out he was a Sox fan. Not happy, not making us happy, I know, but no, it's a great thing. So for the America and for the United States. And listen, the day's got to come. He's got to come to Chicago and have a mass and hold it here. That hasn't been done since, I think, John Paul II or something. So that would be, I think, an amazing moment in Chicago. So let's enjoy the positive side for now.
Let's enjoy it. You're right.
Arguably, the Pope and the President, the two most famous people in the world, and interesting that people will hear really different perspectives from two Americans.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see also how they interact with each other. I mean, the president has said he looks forward to meeting him, and I'm sure he does know some of the negative things that not the Pope, but the Cardinal had said about him. But I think they have to start off on a level playing field. So at one point they'll meet, at one point. But I'm sure if President Trump has something to say about the Pope, he won't hesitate to say it, and we'll see it. But for now, it's calm, it's copacetic. Let's hope it stays that way.
All right, I'm sure we'll be talking more about it. But for now, we want to focus on something that happened here locally at WGN, which was the town hall with Mayor Brandon Johnson. So I had a chance to be there, and I thought this setting really works for him, where it's very relaxed. The audience was there. He got to sort of lay out his agenda and the things that he wanted to do, but I'm not sure if he really accomplished anything. Right?
First of all, you look fabulous. Let's say that. Okay.
Go on.
Go on. But that thing said, look, he ruffled no feathers. He didn't make news. In many ways, he had a lot of young people asked him questions, so they were probably a little nervous and certainly weren't going to push the mayor. So it gave him a chance to sort of just, put out his platform, his position.
Agenda,
now, that being said, I'm going to kind of shift this, because the very last question that Taman and Micah asked him was, how would you grade yourself? Now, I don't know if that took him off guard or not. You should be prepared for something like that. You're halfway through your term. But the fact that he wouldn't do it or couldn't do it, look, he's smart enough to not say, I'm getting an A+, right? He knows that there's issues, but he's certainly not going to say, I'm giving myself a CD. I think he might have said something about, look, we're doing what we can now to bring that grade and make sure at the end of the first term we're in the A range, we're in the A+ range, sort of set it on an upper trajectory to do that sort of going forward. But I thought for him that was sort of an unfortunate moment to just not take that opportunity to talk about his, if not ranking himself today, but the kind of rank he sees going forward.
All right, let's move to another political story, and that is the race to replace retiring Senator Dick Durbin. We've already got three candidates. Raja Krishnamurthy on the trail already. I'm sure if Governor Pritzker had his way, it would be a clear field for Juliana Stratton. Do you think that we will see more and more candidates getting in, or will it be set with these three?
Well, no, I think we're still waiting for Congresswoman Lauren Underwood to make a decision on what she's going to do. You know, again, part of money is key to the game, right? So right now, everybody, and last week or whatever it was, we talked about Juliana Stratton having gotten into it with Pritzker money, Democratic Governor Association money. How do you beat that? Well, hello, Raja Krishnamurthy, with $19 million behind you. He actually has more money than the other candidates put together right now. Now, that game will change, but for now, Krishnamurthy comes out financially strong. And he obviously has a plan. He's been looking to do this for a very long time. So he has a game plan of how he wants to set it out. Robin Kelly, with, you know, look, they're all progressives. It's going to be tough if you had them all debating, which eventually they will. But if you had the three of them, you'd be hard pressed to find too many differences in terms of what they see as a vision for the state in the role of Senate. And you know, and they're all already serving in government. So we'll see how it plays out. I don't think the race is set yet. You have until, you know, this summer. I mean, it's not until July, August that petitioning and things have to start. So I expect Underwood may get into the race. We know that Michael Frericks, the treasurer, who there was a lot of speculation about,
said no,
he
right?
took him out. He took himself out. He was on the show last week, and while he indicated he would tell us very soon, it was pretty clear he wasn't going to go in that direction. But I think there's more people thinking about it. We'll see. And we haven't heard from Republicans yet. Apparently, Darren LaHood would be the one people are talking about. He did leave the door open in a tweet or whatever that he put out there. But word from his campaign or from his people are sort of like, nah, he's not going to go in that direction. He's got a safe seat if he wants to continue to work in Congress. And he's in a Republican government right now. Whether that'll be that way in 2026 remains to be seen.
And Durbin himself not likely to make an endorsement in the primary.
He said that he's not. I don't think he will. They're all his friends, right? And everybody will want it. Raja today announcing an endorsement of a labor union. They're all going to start kind of piling that up as much as they can and getting the endorsements. The thing is, endorsements don't matter much, really, to people's decisions. But it will be interesting to see where the real power brokers do end up here and how that translates to money.
Okay, let's shift to the national stage and let's talk about tariffs, because I think we're still as confused as we were when this all started, right? They said they announced a deal with the UK, but we don't really have much details as to what that would look like.
What we got is a framework, or as one of Trump's assistants said, the concept of a plan. That's a familiar phrase to us. But no, here's the thing. It's interesting that England is the first country, because actually we do have a trade deficit, but it goes the other way. Right. It's actually to our benefit with that country. This notion of Trump sort of saying we're not going to put a tariff on Rolls Royces because that's a special car. You know, and other points he's made this week about have $2, not 30, 5 pencils, not 300. You just have to raise the question, Mr. President, who are you speaking to? Because it's sounding a little, I'll be honest, sort of tone deaf when it comes to middle class and average income people. They're not living in that world that he's speaking to. So hopefully he will sort of shift and realize how people are being affected. Look, the boats are not now arriving into the ports. And so this is when people are going to soon, in the next week, 2, 3, are going to start feeling all this. We'll see what kind of pressure he feels. China is supposed to happen this week. Trump already in a tweet went down from 145% to 80%, and negotiations haven't started. So that would suggest to me he is a little bit concerned about trying to make something happen with China. We'll see how that goes this weekend.
Big news week, and something that was almost lost in this was something quite startling, where the President of the United States said he wasn't sure if he had to follow the Constitution. Do you think we'll see any more fallout to that, or is this just another thing
it's a stunning statement? Well, I don't know why he said it, but look, you know, what you'd want to say is, Mr. President, go check the oath that you took, because you said, I will defend the Constitution of the United States. So I know he's not a lawyer, and a lot of things that are hitting him lately have to do with being a lawyer, not being a lawyer. He knows he's got to defend the Constitution. It is concerning that he says, I'm not sure whether I have to. It's concerning that we're seeing in all the deportations that are going on. It's a side comment, but people who are being sent to prisons in El Salvador or Libya or the places where this is going on, and yet essentially, I thought we were going to send people back to where they came from. Why are they ending up in a prison? There's lots of big issues that are going to start stirring. We're going to be talking about this for quite a while to come.
We've got so much going on, Paul Lisnek, and especially on your show, Politics Tonight, and Political Report.
Yeah, but we used to do that.
Yeah. No,
it ended in 2020.
Back to that.
But Political Report, actually, it's a look back at the town hall that we just had with Mayor Johnson, and I have asked that every clip that we use have you in it. Who needs Tamana and Micah? We have you.
Right.
That's all we need. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Nice to see
Thanks,
you,
Paul.
sir.
Great to see you.